The spectacles slipped down Zara Daniels' nose as she bent over the dusty display case, and she pushed them back up with an ink-stained finger, already bracing herself for the sneering comments that would inevitably come. It was the spring of 1877 in Hawthorne, Nevada, a ramshackle town that had sprung up around the silver mines and cattle ranches dotting the high desert landscape. And Zara had learned that being a woman who could read, write, and see clearly through wire-rimmed spectacles was somehow offensive to half the population. "Well, if it ain't the bookworm," drawled Tommy Fletcher, sauntering into her father's general store with two of his ranch hand friends. "Still hiding behind those silly glass things, Miss Daniels." Zara straightened, her spine stiffening as she met his gaze through her lenses. At 22 years old, she had endured nearly 8 years of mockery since her father had ordered these spectacles from San Francisco, the only way she could see the world in sharp focus instead of the blurry watercolor it had been before. "They are not silly, Mr. Fletcher. They allow me to see. Perhaps you should try a pair for your brain." The men laughed, but it was the cruel kind of laughter that made her stomach clench. "A woman who reads too much and thinks too much," one of them said. "No wonder you cannot find yourself a husband." "I am not looking for one," Zara replied coolly, though the words stung more than she wanted to admit. She turned back to the ledger she had been updating, hoping they would conclude their business and leave. Her father, Benjamin Daniels, was at the bank settling accounts, leaving her alone to manage the store, something she did competently despite what the town gossip said about women and business. The bell above the door chimed again, and Zara glanced up to see a stranger walk in, his boots echoing on the wooden floorboards. He was tall, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the ends beneath his worn hat. His clothes marked him as a cowboy, dusty from travel, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his place in the world. When his eyes met hers, they were a startling shade of green that reminded her of the rare patches of grass that grew near the springs after winter rains. "Afternoon," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture of respect that immediately set him apart from the men currently loitering near the barrel of pickles. "Good afternoon," Zara replied, trying to ignore how Tommy and his friends had gone quiet, watching this newcomer with the territorial wariness of men who disliked outsiders. "How may I help you? Need supplies?" the stranger said, approaching the counter. "Trail provisions, mostly. Beans, coffee, flour, salt pork if you have it. Maybe some feed for my horse." "We have all of that," Zara said, reaching for her pencil to start tallying his order. As she wrote, her spectacles slipped again, and she pushed them up automatically, so accustomed to the gesture she barely noticed it anymore. "Those are fine spectacles," the stranger said quietly, and Zara's hand froze on the paper. She looked up sharply, expecting mockery, but his expression was sincere. "My mother wore a pair similar to those, said they opened up the whole world for her." Something warm unfurled in Zara's chest, something she had not felt in a long time. "They do," she said softly. "Before I had them, everything was a blur. I could not read, could not see faces clearly. Now I can see every star in the sky." The stranger smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger than she had initially thought. "That sounds like a gift worth having. Name's Mason Stone. I just signed on with the Double R Ranch about 10 miles north of here." "Zara Daniels," she replied, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, an unexpected connection forming in the dusty afternoon light filtering through the store windows. "Well, ain't this sweet?" Tommy Fletcher interrupted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "The bookworm found someone who pretends to like her spectacles. How long you reckon that'll last, stranger? Mason turned slowly, his expression cooling as he regarded Tommy. I reckon it'll last as long as I choose to appreciate a woman with the sense to take care of her eyesight and the intelligence to run a business. That a problem for you. The store went very quiet. Zara held her breath, her heart pounding. Men did not defend her, not in Hawthorne. They either ignored the mockery or joined in, and she had learned to fight her own battles. But here was this stranger, this cowboy named Mason Stone, standing in her father's store and speaking up for her as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Tommy's face reddened. "No problem at all," he muttered, though his eyes promised this was not over. "Come on, boys, let's leave the two lovebirds alone." They left in a clatter of boots and slammed doors, and the silence they left behind felt heavy with possibility. "I apologize if I overstepped," Mason said, turning back to Zara, "but I cannot abide men who mock others for things that make them unique." "You did not overstep," Zara said, her voice slightly breathless, "though you may have made yourself some enemies on your first day in town." Mason shrugged. "I have had enemies before. They do not trouble me much." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Besides, some things are worth making enemies over." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks, and she ducked her head, ostensibly to focus on his supply list. "Let me gather your items," she said, grateful for the excuse to move, to do something with her hands that were suddenly trembling slightly. As she moved around the store, pulling down sacks of flour and coffee, wrapping salt pork in brown paper, she was acutely aware of Mason watching her. Not in the leering way some men did, but with genuine interest, as though she were a puzzle he wanted to understand. When she returned to the counter with her arms full, he immediately stepped forward to help, taking the heavier items from her without being asked. "You run this store alone?" he asked as she tallied up the costs. "My father owns it, but I manage the daily operations. He handles the business side, the negotiations with suppliers and such. I handle inventory, sales, the books." She pushed her spectacles up again, a nervous habit. "People say it is not proper work for a woman, but my father believes in using the talents God gave us, regardless of what society dictates." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Mason said. "My mother felt the same way. She taught me to read and write, even though my father said it was a waste for a boy who would spend his life working cattle. But she said knowledge was never wasted, that it would serve me well no matter what path I chose." "She was right," Zara said, meeting his eyes. "Is she still living?" Something flickered across Mason's face, a shadow of old grief. "No, she passed 5 years ago. Fever took her. My father followed a year later. His heart just gave out one day while he was mending a fence." "I am sorry," Zara said softly, and she meant it. She had never lost anyone close to her, could not imagine the pain of losing both parents. "Thank you," Mason said. "They were good people. They taught me to see the worth in others, not just in what they could do for me, but in who they were." He paused, then added with deliberate care, "They would have liked you, my mother especially. She always said that a woman who could think for herself was worth 10 who could not." Zara felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. She had been complimented on her appearance before, though never in a way that felt genuine, always with an undertone of mockery about her spectacles or her bookish nature. But no one had ever complimented her mind, her independence, the very things that made her who she was. "That will be $4.30, she said, her voice not quite steady. Mason counted out the money, his calloused fingers careful with the coins. "I will need to come back for supplies regularly," he said. "The ranch is close enough that I will likely be the one running errands into town." "We are open every day except Sunday," Zara replied, trying to sound professional even as her heart did a strange little skip at the thought of seeing him again. Good to know. Mason gathered his supplies, then paused at the door. Miss Daniels, those spectacles make you see the world clearly, but I hope you know that they are not all people see when they look at you. Some of us see a capable, intelligent woman who is not afraid to be herself. That is a rare thing, and it is beautiful. He left before she could respond, the door closing behind him with a gentle chime. Zara stood frozen behind the counter, her hands pressed against the worn wood, her heart racing in her chest. She removed her spectacles and cleaned them on her apron, a gesture that gave her something to do while her mind whirled. Beautiful. He had called her beautiful, not despite her spectacles, but as part of who she was. And he had said it simply, without flourish or expectation, as though it were merely a fact he was pointing out. The door to the back room opened, and her father emerged, his arms full of crates that needed unpacking. Benjamin Daniels was a stout man with graying hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. "I thought I heard voices. Did we have customers?" "Yes, Papa." Zara moved to help him with the crates. Tommy Fletcher and his friends, and a new ranch hand from the R Mason Stone. Her father's eyebrows rose at the way she said the name, with a softness that was unlike her usual crisp tone. "Mason Stone. Did he cause you any trouble?" "No," Zara said quickly. "The opposite, actually. Tommy was being his usual unpleasant self about my spectacles, and Mr. Stone defended me." Benjamin set down his crate and studied his daughter with the shrewd gaze that had made him successful in business. "Did he now? That was decent of him." "He said his mother wore spectacles too," Zara continued, not quite able to stop herself from talking about it. "He said they opened up the world for her." A smile tugged at Benjamin's mouth. "Sounds like a man with sense in his head. We do not get many of those passing through Hawthorne." "Papa," Zara protested, but she was smiling too, helpless against the warmth that still glowed in her chest. The rest of the day passed in the usual rhythm of commerce, farmers and ranchers coming in for supplies, women browsing the limited selection of fabrics and notions, children pressing their noses against the glass case of penny candies. But through it all, Zara found her thoughts drifting back to green eyes and a quiet voice saying that her spectacles were fine, that she was beautiful. That evening, as she and her father closed up the store and climbed the stairs to their living quarters above, Zara paused at her bedroom window. From here, she could see out across the desert toward where the R Ranch lay, invisible in the gathering darkness. Somewhere out there, Mason Stone was settling into his new job, probably bedding down in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands, unaware that he had shifted something fundamental in her world. She touched her spectacles, feeling the smooth wire frames, the cool glass. For so long, they had been a source of shame, a thing that marked her as different, strange, unmarriageable. But Mason had looked at them and seen not a flaw but a tool, a means by which she could see and understand the world more fully. "I love the way you see the world." He had not said those exact words, but the sentiment had been there, woven through everything he had said to her. And for the first time in a very long time, Zara allowed herself to wonder what it might be like to be loved for exactly who she was. The next few days passed without any sign of Mason, and Zara told herself she was being foolish for watching the door every time the bell chimed, for feeling disappointed when it was just another customer with no green eyes and no quiet compliments. She threw herself into her work, reorganizing the storeroom, updating the inventory, helping her father negotiate a better price with their flour supplier. On Friday afternoon, a week after their first meeting, the bell chimed and Mason walked in, his hat in his hands and a slightly uncertain expression on his face. "Miss Daniels," he said, his voice formal in the way of a man who had been practicing what he wanted to say. "I was wondering if you might do me the honor of taking a walk with me on Sunday afternoon. I understand it is your day off from the store." Zara's heart leaped into her throat. Around them, the other customers had gone quiet, listening with the shameless interest of people who lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. She was acutely aware of Mrs. Patterson by the fabric table, of old Mr. Chen browsing the tobacco selection, of her own father in the back room, probably hearing every word. "I would like that," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded when everything inside her felt like it was vibrating with nervous energy. Mason's face broke into a smile that made him look boyish and vulnerable. 2 o'clock. I could meet you here." 2 o'clock would be perfect, Zara agreed. He bought a few small items, unnecessary things that made it clear he had really come to see her and not for supplies. And then he was gone again, leaving Zara to face the knowing looks of the other customers and her father's poorly concealed grin. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that made the desert bloom with unexpected color. Zara changed her dress 3 times before settling on a simple blue cotton one that brought out the color of her eyes, then immediately felt foolish for caring so much. But when she caught sight of herself in the mirror, spectacles perched on her nose and hair neatly pinned back, she felt a flicker of something she had not felt in a long time: hope. Mason arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, dressed in clean clothes that still bore the faint scent of lye soap and sunshine. He offered her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy, and they set off down the main street of Hawthorne, heading toward the path that led up into the low hills behind the town. "I have been looking forward to this all week," Mason admitted as they walked, and Zara was charmed by his honesty. "So have I," she confessed, "though I will admit I was not sure you would really come." "Why would I not?" Zara hesitated, then decided that if this was going to be anything real, it needed to start with honesty. "Because most men are put off by a woman who wears spectacles and runs a business and reads books. They want someone softer, more conventional." Mason was quiet for a moment, his boots crunching on the desert floor. "I think conventional is another word for ordinary, and you, Miss Daniels, are anything but ordinary." They walked in companionable silence for a while, following the path up into the hills where juniper trees grew in twisted shapes, and wildflowers dotted the landscape in bursts of yellow and purple. The desert air was clean and sharp, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "Tell me about yourself," Zara said as they paused at a rocky outcrop that offered a view back down to Hawthorne, small and dusty in the valley below. "Where are you from originally?" "Texas," Mason said, settling onto a flat rock and gesturing for her to join him. "My parents had a small ranch near San Antonio. Nothing fancy, just enough cattle to get by and a few horses. I grew up learning to rope and ride, mend fences and doctor sick animals. It was a good life, simple but good." "What brought you all the way to Nevada?" Mason's expression grew distant. "After my parents died, I could not bear to stay on the ranch. Too many memories. I sold it to a neighbor and started drifting, taking work where I could find it. I have been a ranch hand in Colorado, worked cattle drives in New Mexico, even spent a few months working in a stable in Santa Fe. But I was ready to settle somewhere, put down roots again. The double R had an opening, and Nevada seemed as good a place as any." "And now?" Zara asked softly. He turned to look at her, his green eyes serious. "Now I am thinking Nevada might be exactly where I am supposed to be." Zara felt her breath catch. There was no mistaking the meaning in his words in the way he looked at her. "Mason," she began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate what she was feeling. "I know this is forward," Mason said. "We have only just met, but I believe in being honest about my intentions. From the moment I walked into your father's store and saw you standing there, pushing up your spectacles and not taking any guff from those idiots, I felt something. Like recognition, maybe. Like finding something I did not know I was looking for." "I felt it too," Zara whispered. "I thought I was being foolish, that I was imagining things. You were not imagining anything." Mason reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and took her hand. His palm was rough from years of hard work, warm and strong. "I want to court you properly, Zara. I want to take walks like this and learn everything about you. I want to hear your thoughts on books and business and whatever else interests that remarkable mind of yours. And I want you to know that I think you are beautiful, spectacles and all. Especially with the spectacles, because they let you see the world the way you are meant to see it." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, and she did not try to hide them. "No one has ever said anything like that to me before. Then people have been fools." Mason squeezed her hand gently. "But their foolishness is my good fortune, because it means you are still here, still available for a cowboy from Texas to come along and fall head over heels for you." Zara laughed, a bright sound that echoed off the rocks around them. "You are falling head over heels already." "That seems rather fast." "Maybe," Mason agreed, a smile playing at his lips. "But I have learned that when something feels right, you do not question it. You just hold on tight and see where it leads." They sat together on that rocky outcrop for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Mason told her about life on the range, about pre-dawn mornings rounding up cattle and nights sleeping under more stars than seemed possible. Zara told him about growing up in Hawthorne, about teaching herself mathematics from her father's account books, and reading every book she could get her hands on from the small lending library in the church basement. "What is your favorite book?" Mason asked at one point. Zara thought about it. "It changes depending on my mood, but I think maybe Jane Eyre. I love that she refuses to compromise who she is, even when it would be easier to bend to what others expect of her." "I have not read it," Mason admitted, "but I would like to if you think it is worthwhile. You read for pleasure." Zara could not keep the surprise from her voice. Most of the men she knew viewed reading as a necessary evil at best. "I do. Nothing too fancy, mostly newspapers and the occasional dime novel, but my mother instilled a love of stories in me. I may not be educated like you, but I know the value of a good book." "I could lend you some," Zara offered, "if you like." "I would like that very much." As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Mason walked Zara back to town. They moved slowly, reluctant for the day to end, their hands still linked between them. At the door to the general store, Mason released her hand with obvious reluctance. "May I see you again? Next Sunday?" "Yes," Zara said immediately. "And perhaps you could come by the store during the week. We get a newspaper delivery every Wednesday. You could read it while I work." Mason's smile was answer enough. In the weeks that followed, a pattern developed. Mason came by the store at least twice a week, ostensibly for supplies but really just to see Zara, to talk to her while she worked, to make her laugh with stories about life on the ranch. On Sundays, they took long walks into the hills, finding quiet places where they could talk for hours without interruption. The town noticed, of course. Hawthorne was too small for anything to go unnoticed, especially something as interesting as the bookish woman with spectacles being courted by the handsome new cowboy. Most people seemed pleased, happy to see Zara finally finding someone after years of being dismissed by the eligible men in town. But there were a few, Tommy Fletcher chief among them, who seemed to take offense at this turn of events. She thinks she is too good for the rest of us now, Tommy grumbled one day in the saloon, loud enough for half the town to hear. Got herself a cowboy who pretends to like her spectacles and her books, and now she walks around like she is something special. Mason, who was playing cards at a nearby table, set down his hand with deliberate care. Miss Daniels does not think she is too good for anyone. She is simply too good for men who mock her for being intelligent and capable. There is a difference. You defending your sweetheart, Tommy sneered. How touching. I am defending a good woman from a small-minded man, Mason replied evenly. And yes, she is my sweetheart, and I am proud of that fact. The confrontation might have escalated if the ranch foreman, a grizzled man named Jack Murphy, had not intervened. Fletcher, take your grievances somewhere else. And Stone, you have work tomorrow, best not to get into any fights tonight. Mason nodded, acknowledging the wisdom of this, and returned to his card game. But word of the exchange made its way back to Zara, carried by well-meaning friends, and she felt a complicated mix of warmth at Mason's defense and worry about what it might mean. He is going to make real enemies if he keeps defending me, she told her father that evening as they ate dinner in their apartment above the store. Benjamin looked at his daughter over his spectacles, so similar to her own. A man who will not defend the woman he loves is not much of a man. Mason knows what he is doing. He has not said he loves me, Zara protested, though her heart skipped at the word. Her father just smiled. Give him time, though from where I sit it is obvious to anyone with eyes. 2 months into their courtship, on a Sunday afternoon in late June, Mason took Zara to a place he had discovered during his explorations of the area. It was a hidden spring, tucked into a canyon where cottonwood trees grew thick and the water ran clear over smooth stones. Someone long ago had built a small bench near the water's edge, and though it was weathered now, it still held. They sat together on that bench, their shoulders touching, watching dragonflies skim the surface of the water. The air was cooler here, shaded by the trees, a respite from the desert heat. I have been thinking, Mason said, his voice quiet in the peaceful setting, about the future, about what I want from life. Zara's heart began to beat faster. What do you want? Mason turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. I want a home, not just a place to sleep, but a real home with someone I love. I want to build something permanent, something that lasts. I want children someday, a family to pass on the things my parents taught me. I want to wake up every morning next to someone who challenges me, who makes me think, who sees the world in her own unique way and helps me see it that way too. Mason, Zara breathed, scarcely daring to hope. I love you, Zara Daniels, Mason said, and the words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything. I love your intelligence and your strength. I love the way you push up your spectacles when you are concentrating. I love how you are not afraid to speak your mind, even when it would be easier to stay quiet. I love the way you see the world, clear and sharp and full of possibility. And I know it has only been 2 months, but I am certain of this. I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me. Tears streamed down Zara's face, and she made no attempt to stop them. I love you too, she said, her voice breaking on the words. I did not think I could love someone this much, this deeply, but you make me feel seen in a way I never have before. You make me feel like all the things I was mocked for are actually gifts, things to be celebrated instead of hidden. Mason reached up and gently removed her spectacles, setting them carefully aside, then cupped her face in his hands. They are gifts, he said fiercely. You are a gift. And I will spend every day of my life making sure you know that. When he kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, full of promise and barely restrained passion. Zara kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, and felt like she was finally, truly home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Mason rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Zara. I do not have much, just my wages from the ranch and whatever I saved from selling my parents' place. But I will work hard, I will provide for you, and I will love you every single day for the rest of our lives." "Yes," Zara said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." Mason whooped, actually whooped, and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. When he set her down, he retrieved her spectacles and carefully placed them back on her nose. "Cannot have you missing anything," he said with a grin. They walked back to town holding hands, their future spreading out before them bright with possibility. When they told Benjamin, he embraced Mason with genuine warmth and wiped away a tear as he hugged his daughter. "I always knew you would find someone who deserved you," he said to Zara. "I just had to be patient." The wedding was planned for September, after the worst of the summer heat had passed, but before the winter snows began. In the meantime, Mason and Zara spent every moment they could together, learning each other's habits and dreams, making plans for their life together. Mason saved every penny he could, working extra hours when they were available, determined to have enough money to start their marriage on solid footing. He found a small house on the edge of Hawthorne, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but with a good roof and a well in the yard. And he negotiated to buy it with a portion of his savings and a promise to pay the rest in installments. Zara helped him fix it up, spending her Sunday afternoons painting walls and mending curtains, turning the bare rooms into a home. She hung curtains in the windows and placed her small collection of books on a shelf Mason built for her. He carved their initials into the door frame, M and Z surrounded by a heart, and she kissed him for it, overwhelmed by the simple sweetness of the gesture. "I want you to keep working at the store if you want to," Mason told her one evening as they sat on the porch of their almost home, watching the sunset. "I know how much it means to you, and I would never ask you to give that up. You would not mind having a wife who works?" Zara asked, surprised despite knowing Mason's open mind. "I would mind having a wife who was unhappy," Mason corrected. "If working at the store makes you happy, then that is what you should do. We will figure out the rest as we go." It was this kind of support, this constant affirmation of who she was and what she valued, that made Zara fall more in love with him every day. She had not known it was possible to feel this much, to have your heart feel so full it seemed like it might burst. The mockery had not entirely stopped. There were still people in Hawthorne who made snide comments about Zara's spectacles, who questioned whether Mason would really go through with marrying such a strange woman. But these voices grew quieter as the wedding approached, drowned out by the genuine happiness of people who had watched Zara grow up and were glad to see her finding love. On a warm September morning, with wildflowers blooming improbably in the desert and the sky a brilliant cloudless blue, Zara Daniels married Mason Stone in the small church at the center of Hawthorne. She wore a simple white dress that her mother's sister had sent from California, and she kept her spectacles firmly on her nose, refusing to remove them even though several women suggested she might look prettier without them. "I want to see my husband clearly when I marry him," she had said firmly, and that had been the end of it. When Mason saw her walking down the aisle on her father's arm, his face transformed with such open love and joy that half the congregation started crying. And when the minister asked if he took this woman to be his lawfully wedded wife, Mason said, "I do," in a voice that rang through the church like a bell. Their kiss at the altar was chaste, appropriate for the setting, but Zara could feel the promise in it, the passion held carefully in check. Later, she thought, Later they would have all the time in the world. The reception was held in the yard behind the general store, with tables laden with food that the townspeople had contributed, and a fiddle player providing music for dancing. Zara danced with her father, with old Mr. Chen from the store, with Jack Murphy from the ranch, who had become a friend to both her and Mason. But mostly she danced with her husband, that word still so new and wonderful that she kept repeating it in her mind. Husband. Mason was her husband. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, Mason and Zara slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to their little house on the edge of town. Mason carried her over the threshold, another old tradition, and set her down gently in the middle of their front room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Stone," he said softly. "I like the sound of that," Zara replied, reaching up to touch his face. "Though I think I will keep using Daniels at the store for business purposes. Will that bother you?" "Nothing you do could bother me," Mason said. And then he was kissing her, really kissing her, with all the passion he had been keeping carefully controlled during their courtship. Zara kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, and when he swept her up and carried her to their bedroom, she went willingly, eagerly, ready to start this new chapter of their life together. Their wedding night was everything Zara had hoped and nothing she had expected, tender and passionate and occasionally awkward in the way of two people learning each other's bodies for the first time. But through it all, Mason was patient and loving, making sure she felt cherished and desired. And when Zara finally fell asleep in his arms as the first light of dawn crept through their window, she felt more completely happy than she had ever thought possible. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space, to coordinate schedules, to navigate the small disagreements that inevitably arose when two independent people tried to build a life together. But Mason and Zara approached these challenges with the same honesty and communication that had characterized their courtship, talking through problems instead of letting them fester. Zara continued to work at the store, and Mason supported her completely, even helping out on his days off when shipments came in or inventory needed to be done. He never complained about her long hours or suggested that she should be home more, understanding that the work fulfilled something in her that had nothing to do with him. For his part, Mason thrived at the Double R Ranch, his skill with horses and cattle earning him the respect of the other ranch hands, and a promotion to lead hand with a corresponding increase in wages. The extra money meant they could start saving toward bigger dreams, toward the possibility of one day buying their own small ranch. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit together on their porch, Zara reading aloud from whatever book had caught her interest while Mason whittled or mended tack. Sometimes they would just talk, sharing their days and their thoughts, building the deep intimacy that came from truly knowing another person. "I got into it with Tommy Fletcher again today," Mason mentioned one evening about 6 months into their marriage. "He was at the ranch delivering some horses his boss sold to ours, and he made some comment about you." Zara looked up from her book. "What kind of comment?" "The usual nonsense about your spectacles, about how he cannot understand what I see in you." Mason's jaw tightened. "I told him he did not have to understand it. He just had to keep his opinions to himself." "Did he?" "After I explained it in terms he could understand, yes." Zara set down her book and moved to sit beside Mason on the porch steps. "I do not want you getting into fights because of me." "I did not hit him," Mason assured her, "though I was tempted. But Zara, I will not stand by and let anyone disrespect my wife. I am sorry if that worries you, but it is who I am." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I know, and I love that you defend me. I just do not want you to be hurt because of it." Mason put his arm around her, pulling her close. "The only thing that could hurt me is if you ask me to stop being who I am. As long as I have you and you have me, the Tommy Fletchers of the world cannot touch us." Spring came again, marking a full year since Mason had first walked into the general store and changed Zara's life forever. And with spring came news that made Zara both thrilled and terrified. She was going to have a baby. She told Mason one evening after supper, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "There is a child growing here," she said simply. "Our child." Mason's face went through a complicated series of expressions, shock and joy and fear all flashing across his features, before settling into a smile so bright it could have lit up the whole desert. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." "In about 6 months, according to the doctor," Zara confirmed. "Are you happy?" "Happy," Mason laughed, a slightly wild sound. "Zara, I am terrified and elated and so in love with you I can barely breathe. A baby, our baby." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, his hand still pressed against her stomach as though he could already feel the tiny life growing there. When they finally pulled apart, there were tears on both their faces. "I hope the baby gets your eyes," Mason said, "and your intelligence." "I hope the baby gets your kindness," Zara replied, "and your strength." "Do you think the baby will need spectacles?" Mason asked, a hint of worry in his voice. Zara laughed. "If the baby does, then we will get them, just like my father got them for me. And we will teach our child that spectacles are nothing to be ashamed of, that they are simply a tool to help see the world more clearly. We will teach our child to be proud of who they are," Mason agreed. "No matter what anyone else says." The pregnancy was not easy. Zara suffered through months of morning sickness that often lasted all day, and the summer heat made her feel even more miserable. But Mason was endlessly patient, bringing her cool water and damp cloths, taking over more of the household chores without complaint, rubbing her aching back in the evenings. As her belly grew, Zara had to adjust how she worked at the store, unable to lift heavy items or stand for as long as she once had. Her father hired a young man to help with the physical labor, freeing Zara to focus on the bookkeeping and customer service that she enjoyed most. The townspeople were mostly supportive, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes, knitting tiny blankets and caps. Even some of those who had mocked Zara for years seemed to soften, won over by the visible evidence of her happiness and Mason's devotion. On a cold November night, with snow falling softly outside their windows, Zara went into labor. It was long and difficult, hours of pain that had Mason pacing the floor and praying to every deity he could think of. The midwife, a competent woman named Mrs. Grayson, remained calm throughout, guiding Zara through the contractions and offering encouragement. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, a baby's cry filled the house. "It is a boy," Mrs. Grayson announced, placing the squalling infant on Zara's chest. "A healthy baby boy." Zara looked down at her son, at his tiny face screwed up in protest at being thrust into the cold world, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Mason knelt beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, one hand touching the baby's tiny head with infinite gentleness. "He is perfect," Mason whispered. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Matthew Benjamin Stone after Mason's father and Zara's father, and he was indeed perfect. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's serious expression, and when he opened his eyes, they were a deep blue that would eventually shift to green. The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting and beautiful, filled with sleepless nights and tiny miracles. Mason proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with Matthew when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, singing soft lullabies in the middle of the night. "I never knew I could love someone this much," he told Zara one night as they watched their son sleep in his cradle. "I thought I loved you as much as it was possible to love someone, but this is different. It is like my heart has expanded to hold even more." "I know exactly what you mean," Zara replied, leaning against his shoulder. "It is terrifying and wonderful all at once." As Matthew grew, it became clear he had inherited his mother's poor eyesight. By the time he was 3 years old, he squinted at things in the distance and held books close to his face. Zara took him to the same doctor in Carson City, who had first prescribed her spectacles all those years ago. "He definitely needs them," the doctor confirmed. "The same condition as his mother." When Matthew's spectacles arrived, tiny wire-rimmed things that sat on his small nose, Zara knelt down to his level. "These will help you see better," she explained. "Just like Mama's help her." Matthew touched the spectacles curiously. "Will people laugh at me like they laugh at you sometimes?" Zara felt her heart clench. Even at 3, he had already noticed. "Some people might," she said honestly, "but that is their problem, not yours. You are going to be able to see every star in the sky, every bird in the trees, every word in every book. And anyone who thinks that is something to mock is not worth your time." "Your mama is right," Mason added, joining them. "I think you look very handsome in your spectacles, distinguished even." Matthew brightened. "Like Mama." "Exactly like Mama," Mason confirmed, and Zara felt tears prick her eyes at the love in his voice. True to their word, Mason and Zara taught Matthew to be proud of his spectacles, to see them not as a flaw but as a tool. When other children teased him, which they inevitably did, Matthew would simply push up his spectacles and repeat what his parents had told him. That being able to see clearly was a gift, not a curse. The years passed in a rhythm of work and family, of small joys and occasional hardships. Zara eventually took over running the general store entirely when her father decided to retire, and she proved to have an even better head for business than Benjamin had. Under her management, the store expanded, adding new products and attracting customers from ranches and towns farther afield. Mason worked his way up to foreman at the Double R, a position of real responsibility that came with a substantial salary. They saved diligently, and when Matthew was 5 years old, they finally achieved their dream of buying their own small ranch, 50 acres with good water and enough grazing land for a modest herd of cattle. They hired a manager for the general store, a trustworthy young woman who reminded Zara of herself at that age, and Zara transitioned to overseeing the business while spending more time at the ranch. It was hard work, building something from the ground up, but they did it together, the whole family pitching in. 2 years after buying the ranch, Zara gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Rose. Unlike her brother, Sarah had perfect vision, but she inherited her mother's love of reading and her father's way with animals. She and Matthew were close despite their age difference, and watching them play together filled Zara with a contentment she had never imagined possible. On a warm spring evening, when Matthew was 10 and Sarah was 5, the family sat together on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and purple. Matthew was reading to his sister from a book of fairy tales, his spectacles glinting in the fading light. Sarah listened raptly, interrupting occasionally with questions or observations. "I still cannot believe this is our life," Zara said softly to Mason, who sat beside her with his arm around her shoulders. "Sometimes I think I will wake up and find it was all a dream." "It is real," Mason assured her, pulling her closer. "Every beautiful, improbable moment of it. Do you remember the first time you came into the store, when you told me my spectacles were fine?" Mason smiled. "I remember thinking that anyone who mocked you for those spectacles was an idiot. I remember seeing you standing there, so strong and self-assured despite the harassment, and feeling like I had been punched in the chest. I thought you were being kind just to spite Tommy Fletcher, Zara admitted. I was being honest because I could not imagine being anything else with you, Mason corrected. From that very first moment, you demanded honesty. It was one of the things I loved about you. Loved, Zara teased. Past tense. Love, Mason amended, turning to look at her fully. Present tense, future tense, every tense there is. I love you, Zara Stone. I love the way you see the world through those spectacles. I love that you taught our son to be proud of his. I love every single thing about you, and I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that too. Zara kissed him, not caring that their children were right there and could see, needing him to know that she felt exactly the same way. When they finally pulled apart, Matthew and Sarah were both watching them with identical grins. You two are sappy, Matthew declared, but his tone was affectionate. Wait until you fall in love, Mason told him. Then you will understand. I am never falling in love, Matthew said with all the certainty of a 10-year-old. It looks exhausting. It is, Zara agreed. But it is also the best thing that can happen to a person, if you find the right one. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, visible and sharp through Zara's spectacles, she reflected on how far she had come from that mocked girl in the general store. She had found love with a man who saw her clearly in every sense of the word. She had built a successful business and helped build a thriving ranch. She had raised children who were kind and confident, who knew their own worth. The spectacles that had once been a source of shame had become a symbol of something else entirely. Of clear sight, of intelligence, of the courage to be different. And most importantly, they had led her to Mason, to a love that had transformed her entire life. Thank you, she said quietly to Mason as the children went back to their story. For what? For seeing me, really seeing me, for loving the way I see the world. Mason kissed her temple, his arm tightening around her. Thank you for letting me into your world. It is a beautiful place to be. And there, on the porch of their ranch house, with their children reading by lamplight and the desert stars emerging one by one in the vast Nevada sky, Zara understood that this was what happiness looked like. Not perfect, not without struggles, but real and honest and built on a foundation of genuine love and respect. The mockery she had endured for so many years had led her here, to this moment, to this life. And she would not change a single thing about her journey, because every step had been necessary to bring her to Mason, to their children, to this sense of belonging so complete, it felt like coming home. Years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The ranch prospered under their careful management, the herd growing from a modest few dozen head of cattle to several hundred. Mason's reputation as a fair and skilled rancher spread throughout the region, and they began supplying beef to mining camps and towns across Nevada. Zara maintained her involvement with the general store, though in a more supervisory role, and her business acumen helped them weather the economic ups and downs that periodically swept through the territory. She also became known for her willingness to extend credit to families in need and her fair prices, earning the loyalty and respect of the community. Matthew grew into a thoughtful young man, his intelligence and gentle nature making him popular despite the spectacles he still wore. He decided he wanted to study law, inspired by a traveling judge who came through Hawthorne and stayed at the ranch for a few days. Mason and Zara supported his ambition, saving money to send him to school back east when he was old enough. Sarah, meanwhile, developed a passion for horses that rivaled her father's. By the time she was 12, she could outride most of the ranch hands, and she had a gift for training horses that even Mason admitted surpassed his own. She had no interest in conventional feminine pursuits, preferring to spend her days in the barn or out on the range. And Zara and Mason supported her completely, remembering their own struggles against societal expectations. The ranch became a gathering place for the community, hosting barn dances and holiday celebrations. Zara and Mason's home was known as a place of warmth and welcome, where anyone could find a meal and a sympathetic ear. They employed several ranch hands year-round, treating them fairly and paying them well, and as a result, had one of the most loyal crews in the region. Tommy Fletcher, who had caused so much trouble in the early days, eventually moved away from Hawthorne, his father's ranch having failed due to mismanagement and drought. Before he left, he stopped by the general store one last time. "I owe you an apology, Miss Daniels," he said, still unable to use her married name. "Mrs. Stone, I mean. I was cruel to you for a long time and there was no excuse for it." Zara, now in her mid-30s and more confident than ever, regarded him steadily. "What changed your mind?" Tommy looked uncomfortable. "I have been thinking about it for a while. Watching you and Mason build something real, seeing how happy you are. I think I was jealous or maybe just too stupid to know any better. Either way, I am sorry." "I accept your apology," Zara said simply. "And I hope you find happiness wherever you end up, Tommy. Everyone deserves that chance." After he left, Mason, who had been listening from the back room, came out and hugged her. "You are a better person than I am. I am not sure I could have been so gracious." "Holding on to anger takes too much energy," Zara replied. "I would rather spend that energy on the people I love." When Matthew turned 18, he left for law school in San Francisco, carrying with him not just his parents' hopes but their unwavering support. It was hard to watch him go, but Zara and Mason knew that they had raised him to make his own choices, to follow his own dreams. Sarah, now 15, stepped up to take on more responsibilities at the ranch, proving herself more than capable. She had inherited her mother's head for business along with her father's skill with livestock, and Mason began teaching her everything he knew about ranch management, recognizing that she would likely take over one day. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Mason surprised Zara with a trip to San Francisco to visit Matthew and to see the city she had only read about in books. They left Sarah in charge of the ranch, trusting her completely, and set off on the multi-day journey west. San Francisco was overwhelming and wonderful, a riot of sights and sounds and smells that Zara tried to absorb all at once. Through her spectacles, she could see every detail of the architecture, the diversity of the people crowding the streets, the ships in the harbor. Mason delighted in her delight, taking her to restaurants and theaters and bookshops, spoiling her in ways they rarely indulged at home. Matthew met them at their hotel, looking older and more sophisticated in his city clothes, but still fundamentally the same earnest young man they had raised. He took them to his classes, introduced them to his professors and friends, showed them the life he was building. And on their last night in the city, over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the bay, he told them he was engaged. "Her name is Emma Carter," Matthew said, his face glowing with happiness. "She is studying to be a teacher. I met her at a lecture series 6 months ago, and I have loved her from that very first conversation." "Does she make you happy?" Mason asked, cutting straight to what mattered. "Deliriously," Matthew confirmed. "She is brilliant and kind, and she does not care at all about my spectacles. She says they make me look distinguished." Zara laughed, tears pricking her eyes at the echo of words Mason had once said to their son. "Then we cannot wait to meet her." Emma joined them for breakfast the next morning, a petite woman with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile. She shook hands with Mason and Zara confidently, then proceeded to charm them both with her intelligence and her obvious adoration of their son. "Matthew has told me so much about you," Emma said to Zara, "about how you built a business from nothing and how you taught him to be proud of who he is. I think you are remarkable." "I just tried to give him the support I did not always have growing up," Zara replied. "The rest was all him." On the journey back to Nevada, Zara leaned against Mason in the train car watching the landscape roll past. "Our baby is getting married," she said, still processing it. "He is not a baby anymore," Mason replied gently. "He is a man and a good one. We did well, you and I." "We did," Zara agreed. "Though I will miss him terribly. He will come back to visit, and we will go see him. Distance does not mean the end of family, just a different shape to it." Matthew and Emma were married the following summer in San Francisco, with Sarah serving as her brother's attendant and Zara and Mason standing proud in the front row. Emma's family welcomed the Stones warmly, and by the end of the celebrations, it felt like their family had simply expanded rather than changed. Back in Nevada, life settled into a new rhythm. Sarah took over more and more of the ranch operations as Mason began to slow down, his years of hard work catching up with him. He was only in his mid-40s, but decades of physical labor had taken their toll. He did not complain, simply adapted, shifting to more supervisory roles and teaching Sarah everything he had learned. Zara, too, began to step back from the day-to-day operations of the store, though she maintained ownership and oversight. She found herself with more free time than she had had in decades, and she used it to pursue interests she had set aside, particularly her love of reading and learning. She started a lending library in Hawthorne, donating many of her own books and soliciting donations from others. It became popular quickly, especially among children and the few other women in town who shared her love of literature. Zara felt a deep satisfaction in providing access to books for those who might not otherwise have them, remembering her own hunger for knowledge as a young woman. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Zara was sorting through new acquisitions for the library when a young girl came in, squinting at the spines of the books from a few feet away. She was perhaps 9 or 10, with braided hair and a dress that had been carefully mended multiple times. "Can I help you find something?" Zara asked gently. The girl jumped, startled, then looked down at her feet. "I cannot read the titles from here," she admitted quietly. "Everything is blurry." Zara's heart clenched with recognition. She walked over and knelt down to the girl's level. "What is your name?" "Lucy, madam, Lucy Patterson." "Well, Lucy, I had the same problem when I was your age. I could not see things clearly either, but then my father got me these." She tapped her spectacles, and suddenly the whole world came into focus. "Have you told your parents about your difficulty seeing?" Lucy shook her head. "Pa says spectacles are expensive and vain. He says if God wanted me to see better, he would have given me better eyes." Zara took a deep breath, fighting down anger at this foolish reasoning. "Lucy, does your mother see clearly?" "Yes, madam." "And your father?" "Yes, madam." "Well, God also gave people the intelligence to invent spectacles to help those who need them. Using tools to help ourselves is not vanity, it is wisdom. I would like to talk to your parents if you would allow me." Lucy looked uncertain, but also hopeful in a way that nearly broke Zara's heart. "They might listen to you," she said. "You are important." The conversation with Lucy's parents was difficult. Mr. Patterson was indeed resistant to the idea of spectacles for his daughter, citing both cost and propriety. But Zara was persistent, sharing her own story and explaining how much the spectacles had changed her life. "I will cover the cost," she finally said. "As a loan, to be repaid whenever you are able, or as a gift if you are never able." But that little girl deserves to see the world clearly, and I will not stand by and watch her struggle the way I did." Mrs. Patterson, who had been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. "We should let her have them, Tom. Mrs. Stone is right. Lucy needs to be able to see." Perhaps it was the combined weight of both women's opinions, or perhaps Mr. Patterson simply ran out of arguments, but he finally agreed. 2 weeks later, Lucy came to the library wearing spectacles that made her face light up with wonder. "I can see the leaves on the trees," she said, staring out the window with amazement. "I did not know they had so many different shades of green, and the mountains, they are so sharp and clear. Mrs. Stone, it is like the whole world is new." Zara hugged her, remembering exactly that feeling. "It never gets old," she promised. "Every day you will see something that takes your breath away." Lucy became a regular visitor to the library, devouring books with the same hunger Zara had once felt. And she was not the only child Zara helped over the years. Word spread that Mrs. Stone at the library would help children who needed spectacles, and several families quietly approached her. Zara helped them all, using the profits from the store and ranch to ensure that no child had to struggle with poor vision if it could be corrected. Mason, when she told him what she was doing, simply pulled her close and said, "This is why I love you. You see a problem and you fix it. You see suffering and you alleviate it. You make the world better just by being in it." When Zara turned 50, the town of Hawthorne threw her a birthday celebration in recognition of all she had done for the community. The party was held at the ranch, with people coming from all over the region to honor her. There were speeches about her business acumen, her generosity, her unwavering support of education and literacy. But the moment that touched Zara most deeply was when Lucy Patterson, now a young woman studying to be a teacher herself, stood up to speak. "Mrs. Stone gave me more than spectacles," Lucy said, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "She gave me the ability to see my future clearly. She showed me that being different was not something to hide but something to embrace. Because of her, I can read, I can learn, I can become whoever I want to be. And I am not the only one. There are dozens of us, children she helped over the years, and we are all better for it." Zara cried, unable to help it, and Mason held her hand throughout, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Later, when the party had wound down and it was just family remaining, Sarah raised a glass in a toast. "To my mother," she said. "The strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I know. Thank you for teaching me that being true to yourself is more important than fitting in, and that real strength comes from lifting others up." "To Mama," Matthew echoed from where he sat with Emma and their infant daughter, Rose, named after Sarah and Emma's grandmother both. "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like, the kind that sees and accepts all of who you are." Mason stood last, pulling Zara to her feet beside him. "To my wife," he said simply, "the love of my life. Thank you for choosing to see the world clearly, and for letting me see it through your eyes. Every day with you has been a gift." They clinked glasses, the sound ringing out across the desert evening, and Zara looked around at the family she had helped create, the community she had helped build, the legacy she was leaving behind. All of it had started with a pair of spectacles and a cowboy who had seen past them to the woman beneath. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own mixture of joy and sorrow. Matthew established a successful law practice in San Francisco, specializing in helping families and small businesses navigate legal issues. He and Emma had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and they visited the ranch every summer, filling the house with noise and laughter. Sarah, after years of insisting she would never marry, met a fellow horse trainer named Daniel Morrison at a livestock auction in Carson City. He was quiet and competent, with a deep respect for Sarah's skills and no interest in trying to change her. They married in a simple ceremony at the ranch and continued to run it together, expanding the horse breeding operation and earning a reputation for producing some of the finest working horses in Nevada. Zara and Mason watched their family grow, taking joy in each new grandchild, each milestone reached. They grew old together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. Mason's hair went completely gray, and Zara's eyes needed stronger spectacles, but they were still fundamentally the same people who had fallen in love in a dusty general store all those years ago. On a spring morning much like the one when they had first met, now nearly 40 years in the past, Zara and Mason sat together on the porch of their ranch house. They were both in their 60s now, their children grown and gone, but they still held hands as they watched the sunrise paint the desert in shades of pink and gold. "You ever regret it?" Zara asked quietly. "Settling down here, building this life?" "You could have kept drifting, seen more of the world." Mason turned to look at her, his green eyes still as clear as they had been the day they met. "Zara Stone, I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. You are my world. Everything else is just scenery." "Still charming after all these years," Zara said, but she was smiling. "I have to keep you interested somehow," Mason replied, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only came from decades of companionship. Around them, the ranch was waking up, ranch hands heading out to start the day's work, horses whinnying in the corral, the whole beautiful machinery of the life they had built together. "I want you to know something," Zara said after a while, "in case I do not say it enough. You changed my life, Mason. Before you, I thought I had to choose between being myself and being loved. You showed me I could have both. You showed me that the right person would love me not despite who I was but because of it." "You changed mine too," Mason replied. "I was drifting when I met you, physically and metaphorically. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something permanent. You gave me a home, Zara. Not just this ranch, but a home in your heart. And that is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." They kissed, slow and sweet, tasting of coffee and shared history and a love that had weathered everything life had thrown at it. When they pulled apart, the sun had fully risen, bathing the ranch in golden light. Sarah rode up to the house on her favorite mare, her own hair beginning to show streaks of gray but her posture as straight and confident as ever. "Morning, you two," she called out cheerfully. "Daniel and I are taking a group out to check the north pasture fences. We should be back by supper." "Be careful," Zara called back automatically, even though her daughter was nearly 40 and perfectly capable of taking care of herself. "Always am," Sarah replied with a grin and rode off again. Mason chuckled. "She is so much like you, you know. Stubborn and brilliant and completely unwilling to let the world tell her who she should be." "She is like both of us," Zara corrected. "She has your way with animals and your quiet strength, the best of both of us." "We made good children," Mason agreed. "And they are making good children of their own. We started something that is going to last, Zara. Long after we are gone, this ranch, this family, the values we instilled, they will all continue." It was a comforting thought, the idea that their love had created ripples that would spread far into the future. Zara leaned against Mason's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, and allowed herself to simply be grateful for everything they had built together. More years passed, the rhythm of seasons and generations continuing. Zara and Mason celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a massive gathering that brought family from across the country. Matthew and his family made the trip from San Francisco, now including 7 grandchildren ranging from infants to young adults. Zara and Daniel's 3 children were there, all of them working the ranch in various capacities. The party was held in the barn, decorated with wildflowers and lanterns, and as Zara danced with Mason to the fiddle music, surrounded by people they loved, she felt an overwhelming sense of completeness. This was what a life well lived looked like, she thought. Not perfect, not without struggles or sorrows, but full of love and connection and meaning. 50 years, Mason murmured in her ear as they swayed together, and I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. That is because you know me better now, Zara replied. You have seen all my flaws, all my difficult moments, and you love me anyway. Because of those things, not anyway, Mason corrected. Your flaws make you real. Your difficult moments make you strong. I love every single part of you, Zara, the parts you show the world and the parts you only show me. All of it. When Mason died, it was peacefully, in his sleep on a cold winter night 2 years after their anniversary. He simply did not wake up one morning, his heart having given out quietly during the night. Zara woke to find him gone, and the grief that followed was unlike anything she had ever experienced. She had known, intellectually, that one of them would have to go first, that their time together was finite. But knowing something and experiencing it were entirely different things. The ranch house felt impossibly empty without him, every room echoing with his absence. The funeral was massive, people coming from all over to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Matthew gave the eulogy, speaking about a father who had taught him to be kind and honest, who had shown him what it meant to truly love another person. My father once told me that when something feels right, you do not question it, you just hold on tight, Matthew said, his voice breaking. He held on tight to my mother for 52 years, and in doing so, he showed all of us what real partnership looks like. He will be deeply missed, but his legacy lives on in all of us. After the funeral, after the well-meaning visitors had gone home and the casseroles had been eaten or frozen, Zara sat alone in the house she had shared with Mason, holding his reading spectacles that he had eventually needed in his later years. She put them on even though they were the wrong prescription and looked out at the desert, trying to see it as he had seen it. Sarah stayed with her for the first weeks, worried about leaving her mother alone. But eventually, Zara insisted she return to her own family, to her own life. I need to learn how to be alone, she explained gently. Not because I want to be, but because I have to be, and I cannot do that with you hovering. Are you sure, Mama? Sarah asked, torn between her responsibilities to her mother and her husband and children. I am sure, Zara confirmed. I will be all right. It will take time, but I will find my way through this. And she did, though it was harder than anything she had ever done. She threw herself back into the library, finding solace in books and in helping others. She spent time with her grandchildren, passing on stories about their grandfather, keeping his memory alive through words. On what would have been Mason's 70th birthday, Zara took a ride out to the hidden spring where he had proposed all those years ago. The bench was still there, more weathered now, and she sat on it, remembering. I miss you, she said aloud to the empty canyon. Every day, every moment, the world is not as bright without you in it. The water burbled over the rocks, the same constant sound it had made that day so long ago. Zara closed her eyes and let herself remember everything. Mason's proposal, his hands holding hers, the love in his eyes. The memory was so vivid she could almost feel him there beside her. But I am going to be okay, she continued, because you taught me how to be strong. You taught me that love does not end just because someone is gone. It changes shape, but it remains. And I will carry our love with me for the rest of my days, Mason, until I can join you wherever you are. Zara lived for another 8 years after Mason's death. Years filled with watching her grandchildren grow and meeting her great-grandchildren, tiny babies who represented the future of the family she and Mason had created. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still running the library, still helping children who needed spectacles, still being a force for good in Hawthorne. On a spring morning much like the one when she had first put on spectacles so many years ago, Zara passed away quietly in her sleep, her worn spectacles on the bedside table beside her. She was 82 years old and had lived a life richer and fuller than she could have ever imagined as that mocked young woman in her father's store. At her funeral, Lucy Patterson, now a grandmother herself and the principal of Hawthorne School, spoke about the woman who had changed her life. "Mrs. Stone taught us all to see clearly," she said. "Not just with our eyes but with our hearts. She saw the potential in people when others saw only flaws. She saw opportunities where others saw obstacles. And she saw love everywhere she looked, in her family, in her community, in the world itself." Zara was buried next to Mason on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a headstone that read simply, "Zara Daniels Stone. She saw the world clearly and loved it well." Next to hers, Mason's headstone read, "Mason Stone. He loved the way she saw the world." The ranch continued under Sarah and Daniel's management, thriving for another generation before being passed down to their children. The general store remained in the family as well, a Daniels or Stone always at the helm, maintaining the tradition of fair dealing and community support that Zara had established. The library that Zara founded grew over the years, eventually moving into its own building, a beautiful structure built with donations from the many people whose lives she had touched. Over the door, a plaque read, "The Zara Stone Memorial Library. Open 1922. She taught us all to see clearly." And in that library, generations of children from Hawthorne and beyond discovered the magic of books, of seeing worlds beyond their own through the written word. Some of them wore spectacles, and when other children teased them, the librarians would tell them the story of Zara Stone, who had turned what others saw as a flaw into a strength, who had built a life of love and meaning despite the mockery she had endured. "She saw the world clearly," they would say, "and she helped others to see it clearly too. That is the legacy she left us all." Years turned to decades and decades to a century, and still the story persisted. In Hawthorne, Nevada, in the library and the general store and the ranch that still bore the Stone name, people remembered. They remembered a woman who had refused to be diminished by the cruelty of others, who had found love with a man who saw her worth, and who had spent her life lifting up those who came after her. They remembered spectacles that had been mocked becoming a symbol of clear sight and intelligence. They remembered a cowboy who had said the right words at the right time and changed the course of one woman's life forever. They remembered a love story that had started in a dusty general store and had echoed through generations. And every time a child put on spectacles for the first time and marveled at how clear the world became, every time someone found courage to be different, to stand out, to embrace what made them unique, Zara Stone's legacy lived on. Because she had proven that being mocked for who you were was not the end of the story but the beginning, and that real love saw past surface differences to the heart of who someone truly was. The spectacles that had once been a source of shame became, through Zara's life and example, a symbol of clear vision in every sense of the word. And the cowboy who had loved the way she saw the world had given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be fully, completely herself and to be loved for it. In the end, that was what mattered. Not the mockery, not the struggles, but the love that had triumphed over all of it. The love between Zara and Mason, between parents and children, between one generation and the next. That love was the legacy that endured, long after the people themselves had passed into memory. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Zara and Mason were together again, seeing the world clearly through eyes unclouded by age or grief. Their love as fresh and vital as it had been on that spring day in 1877, when a cowboy walked into a general store and saw not a woman to be mocked, but a remarkable person worth knowing, worth loving, worth spending a lifetime with. The spectacles that had brought them together, that had allowed Zara to see the world clearly and Mason to see into Zara's heart, remained as symbols of a love that had changed lives and shaped futures. And that, in the end, was the most important thing. That love had won, that kindness had triumphed, that being different had become a source of strength rather than shame. The story of Zara and Mason Stone became legend in Hawthorne and beyond, a reminder that the right person will love you not despite your differences but because of them. That clear sight is a gift worth celebrating, and that the mockery of small minds cannot diminish those with the courage to be themselves. And so their story ended, not with sadness but with celebration, not with an ending but with a legacy that continued to unfold in the lives they had touched, the children they had raised, and the community they had built. Their love had started with spectacles and a kind word, and it had grown into something that would outlast them both, a testament to the transformative power of seeing and being seen, of loving and being loved, exactly as you are.